the most powerful book ever written about money and the spoken word. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the words you speak over your life are quietly writing the balance of your bank account, long before you ever see the number. Long before Florence Scovel Shinn ever picked up her pen, an old proverb had already named the very mechanism she would spend her life teaching. It is written in the book of Proverbs, chapter 18, verse 21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. And Florence Scovel Shinn would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The very same tongue that can starve a dream can also feed it. The very same mouth that says I can never afford, that can just as easily say, supply is flowing to me now." And here is where most people miss it completely. They believe their bank account is reporting the truth to them, when in truth, their own tongue has been writing that report all along. You have not been broke because of your circumstances. You have been broke because of your sentences. And once you see that, you can never again blame the world for what only your own mouth has been declaring over it. So before we go one step further, let us plant a new sentence where the old tired one used to live. A fresh word to replace every worn-out word you have spoken over your own supply. Say it with me. My tongue is now minting my fortune. My consciousness is the vault of divine supply. My word is my wand. Again, my tongue is now minting my fortune. My consciousness is the vault of divine supply. My word is my wand. And if something in you just went quiet as you said that, if some old story loosened its grip even a little, type the word random in the comments below right now. Before the feeling passes, let it be your seal on everything we are about to uncover together. The first key is this. Money was never the thing you were lacking. What you were lacking was the belief that spoke it into being. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that gold and silver are simply the visible form of an invisible substance, and that substance responds to consciousness the way clay responds to a potter's hand. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because most people spend their whole lives negotiating with the visible, arguing with the number on the screen, pleading with the landlord, rationing the grocery list down to the last coin, while the actual lever of change was never sitting inside any of those places at all. Think of the woman who checks her account balance every single morning with her jaw already tight, expecting bad news before she has even opened the app. She has decided, without knowing she has decided, that lack is the truth and abundance is the exception. And so lack keeps arriving right on schedule, not because the universe is cruel, but because her own expectation has been the standing order she never cancelled. She updates her budget, she cuts another subscription, she works a second shift, and still nothing loosens, because she is polishing a room while leaving the door locked from the inside. Now think of another woman, same city, same rent, same modest paycheck, who has simply stopped speaking poverty over her life, who says quietly to herself before she checks anything, "Supply belongs to me now," and watch how differently her week unfolds. Not because coins fall from the sky, but because she starts noticing the overlooked invoice, the returned deposit, the friend who suddenly remembers a debt. The mind that is no longer clenched around lack has room to notice the way is already opening. It is not that her circumstances changed first, and her belief followed politely behind. It is that her belief moved first, and her circumstances quietly rearranged themselves to agree with it. Florence Scovel Shinn would say that money is congealed consciousness, meaning it is your inner state made visible. So the true work was never in the wallet, it was never in the paycheck, it was never even in the market. The true work was always upstream of all of that, in the quiet room of your own belief. It is not that you have been unlucky with money, it is that you have been unaware of the mechanism actually producing it. And once you understand that money was never the thing you were lacking, you have to ask a harder question. If the money was never the real problem, then what has actually been shaping it this whole time? And that question carries us directly into the second key. The tongue that speaks the fortune into being does not act alone. It draws its power from somewhere deeper, and that somewhere deeper is what we turn to now. I declare that I was never broke, only unaware of my own supply. The second key is this. Your consciousness is the actual mint, where every coin of your life is first struck, before it ever appears in your hand. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the visible world is only the outer expression of an invisible cause, and that cause is always the state of mind held long enough to become a settled conviction. Notice she did not say the visible world is the cause. She said it is the expression, which means the paycheck, the rent, the grocery bill, the surprise expense. None of it is original. All of it is an echo, a printout of a decision already made further back in the quiet workshop of your own thought. And here is the part most people never stop to consider. A mint does not strike a coin from a passing thought. A coin requires metal held under sustained heat until it becomes moldable, and your consciousness works the very same way. A single stray worry about money is not yet a coin, it is only warm metal, but that same worry repeated every morning, every checkout line, every time a bill arrives, becomes heat sustained long enough to shape actual currency. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn placed so much weight on repetition. Not because repetition is magic, but because repetition is simply how long anything must be held before it hardens into form. Consider two sisters, raised in the very same house, at the very same kitchen table, hearing the very same parents sigh over the very same unpaid bills. One sister carried that sigh forward into her own adult life without ever questioning it. She still flinches at the mailbox 30 years later. She still says, "Money is just tight for us," as though it were a family surname rather than a sentence she is free to retire. The other sister, at some point nobody around her could quite name, simply stopped repeating the sigh. She did not deny the hard years. She simply refused to keep striking coins in their shape, and slowly, unremarkably, without a single dramatic turning point anyone could point to, her circumstances began to soften into something steadier. Same table, same parent, same sigh heard in childhood, and two entirely different mints running by the time they reached their own kitchens. Think also of the ordinary moment of swiping a card at the register. The outcome of that swipe was never actually decided at the register. The register is only reading a report already filed. The true decision was made earlier, in the quiet, unremarkable minutes when a person either braced for rejection or expected provision. The checkout line simply displays what the mint already struck. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn insisted that changing your circumstances by force, without changing your consciousness first, is like polishing the outside of a coin that was struck wrong on the inside. The shine never lasts, because the mint itself was never corrected. You can refinance the debt, you can pick up a second job, you can budget every dollar with white-knuckled discipline, and still find lack finding new doors to enter through, if the invisible mint underneath it all keeps striking the same worn shape. So consider for a moment, right now, what coin have you been striking without realizing it? Has it been the coin of just getting by, the coin of barely enough, the coin of waiting for the other shoe to drop? Pause for a moment and pick one real belief about money that you have been repeating without question. Just name it honestly to yourself, because you cannot correct a mint you refuse to look at. And once you do look at it, once you actually see the coin you have been striking all along, a new question rises up naturally. If the mint can be corrected, what is the actual tool that does the correcting? And that tool is exactly what we turn to next. The third key is this. The tongue holds the power of both increase and decrease, and Florence Scovel Shinn called the spoken word the most creative instrument a person owns. She often said your word is your wand, and a wand is not decoration, it is an instrument of action. When a wand is waved, something is summoned, or something is dismissed. And your speech works the very same way every day. whether you notice it or not. Think of how many small decrees slip out in an ordinary week. I will never get ahead. This always happens to me. I can't catch a break. Each one sounds like simply describing reality. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught, you are not describing reality when you speak like that. You are legislating it, handing your own wand to the very outcome you claim to fear. Notice how casually these decrees hide inside ordinary conversation. Money doesn't grow on trees. We could never afford that. None of these are spoken as spells. They are spoken as small talk. And that is exactly what makes them so powerful. Because a wand waved carelessly still moves whatever it is pointed at. The tongue does not require sincerity to work. It only requires repetition. A phrase said once may do little, but said daily for years without question. It becomes something closer to law, the way one drop of water does nothing to stone. But the same drop falling in the same place for 20 years carves a channel straight through it. This is why the casual phrases matter every bit as much as the dramatic ones, sometimes more, because no one stands guard against a sentence that sounds like small talk. Consider a father who says, without any malice, "We can't afford that." Every time his children ask for something, he means it only as a quick way to end a conversation. But Florence Scovel Shinn would ask him to notice how many times a week that phrase leaves his mouth, and how each repetition is another stroke of the same wand aimed at limitation. Now imagine him catching the phrase mid-sentence one afternoon and replacing it, not with a lie, not with reckless spending, but with something honestly truer. We are choosing not to buy that right now. We have exactly what we need. The children hear something different. He feels something different saying it. And over months, without any single dramatic moment, the household begins to carry a calmer tone around money entirely, because the wand had simply been redirected, one ordinary sentence at a time. Flip it around. Imagine speaking instead, "I am always provided for. Opportunity finds me easily." This is not empty positivity. This is understanding the tongue is not a passive reporter of your life. It is an active author of it. Consider the shopkeeper who says every morning before opening the door, "Business is slow today," and business dutifully arrives slow, not because customers can hear her, but because her expectation shapes the energy she brings to every interaction. The tired posture, the resigned face, all flowing from the sentence spoken to herself in the mirror. Now imagine she changes one sentence, "Business is brisk and joyful today," and her whole body changes, her greeting warms, her attention sharpens. She notices the customer who was almost going to walk out and gently draws them back in. The tongue did not conjure customers from thin air. It changed the woman who then changed the moment. This is the wand in motion. And once you understand that your own mouth has been waving a wand over your finances every day, whether you meant to or not, a deeper question opens beneath it. Why does the very same word, spoken by two different people, produce two entirely different results? And that question leads us directly into the deepest part of the whole teaching. I declare that my tongue is a wand, and I wave it only toward increase. The fourth key is this. Beneath every word you speak sits a hidden self-concept. And that hidden self-concept decides whether the very same word takes root or simply evaporates in the air. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that you cannot speak a word of abundance while secretly believing you are a person abundance does not happen to. Because the self-concept underneath the word is stronger than the word itself. It is the soil the word is planted in. And no seed, however good, thrives in soil that quietly refuses it. Let us stay with this a while, because it is one of the most misunderstood parts of the whole teaching. Most people think an affirmation is a kind of magic phrase, that if the words are arranged correctly and repeated often enough, results must follow automatically. But Florence Scovel Shinn never taught that. She taught that the word is only ever as strong as the self it is spoken from, which means two people can recite the very same sentence and produce two entirely different lives. First, consider two people saying the exact same affirmation, I am prosperous, out loud, in the mirror, with the same tone, the same repetition, the same sincerity on the surface, and yet one of them sees results within weeks, while the other sees nothing shift at all. What is the difference? The difference is never the words. The words were identical. The difference is what each of them believes about who they fundamentally are underneath those words. One of them has quietly accepted somewhere inside, I am the kind of person things work out for, and the other has quietly accepted, without ever saying it aloud, I am the kind of person who tries hard and still falls short. That second belief sits underneath every affirmation like a silent editor, rewriting the message before it ever reaches the world. It is not that the universe is choosing favorites, it is that one mouth is sending a clear signal, and the other mouth is sending two contradicting signals at once. And a contradicted signal cannot build anything lasting, no matter how prettily it is worded. Second, consider how self-concept forms in the first place. It rarely arrives through one dramatic event. It usually arrives slowly, through 1,000 small repetitions absorbed quietly over years. A parent who sighed about money at the kitchen table. A teacher who said someone would never be good with numbers. A single afternoon of embarrassment over a bounced check that got quietly filed away as evidence of who you are, rather than what simply happened that one day. None of these moments announced themselves as identity. They slipped in disguised as ordinary life. A joke at a family dinner, a passing remark from a boss, a comparison to a sibling who always seemed to handle money more easily, and yet decades later they are still standing guard at the door of every affirmation you try to speak. This is why so many sincere, hard-working people feel privately baffled that their positive words never seem to land. They are not failing at faith. They are simply speaking a new sentence into an old, unexamined room, and the furniture of that old room has never been moved. Third, consider how to actually find your own hidden self-concept, because you cannot correct what you refuse to name. Pause for a moment right now and ask yourself honestly, when I imagine real overflowing abundance, does something in me relax, or does something in me flinch? That flinch, however small, is the self-concept speaking louder than the affirmation ever could. Notice too how it shows up in smaller, quieter ways, all through an ordinary week, in the reflexive apology before asking to be paid fairly, in the instinct to downplay a raise when a friend asks how work is going, in the discomfort of receiving a genuine compliment about your own competence. Each of these tiny moments is a window into the very same hidden belief, and Florence Scovel Shinn taught that no outer word can outrun an inner conviction running the opposite direction for very long. The affirmation may be sincere, but if the self-concept underneath it is still whispering, not for someone like me, the words will keep circling back to where they started. Fourth, let us walk through an entire ordinary day, using this key, so the mechanism becomes undeniable. Both women wake at 7, both say a version of the same prosperity affirmation while brushing their teeth. The first woman spends her drive to work rehearsing every bill due that month. She spends her lunch break scrolling her account with a knot in her stomach. She spends her evening telling a friend that business has been rough lately, and by the time she lies down at night, she has spoken poverty in a dozen small ways for every one prosperous word she spoke that morning. Her affirmation was sincere, but it was outvoted, hour by hour, by a self-concept that never got invited into the conversation. The second woman, after her morning affirmation, catches herself mid-sentence at lunch, about to say something can't afford this right now, and gently corrects it out loud to, I am choosing this wisely right now. She thanks the barista sincerely. Instead of rushing past her, she notices an unexpected referral come in through email and lets herself feel genuinely glad rather than suspicious of it. By evening, she has reinforced her self-concept a dozen small times, instead of undermining it. Same affirmation at 7 that morning, wildly different day, wildly different week, wildly different year if repeated, because the affirmation was never the deciding factor. The self-concept woven through every hour around it was. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the real practice is not the moment at the mirror. It is the 100 small moments after it that either agree with the mirror or quietly argue against it. Fifth, and this is the turn that changes everything. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that self-concept is not fixed. It feels permanent only because it is old, not because it is true. It was built the same way any other belief was built, through repetition, absorbed without question. And anything built through repetition can be rebuilt through repetition, deliberately, patiently, on purpose. This is genuinely good news. It means you are not sentenced for life to the self-concept you inherited from a nervous household or a hard season. It means the very same mechanism that built the false ceiling over your supply can be used. Starting today, to raise it, notice you did not choose your original self-concept. It was handed to you before you were old enough to question it. But the self-concept you carry from this day forward, that one, you are fully permitted to choose on purpose, one honest correction at a time, one evening of noticing instead of complaining, one lunch of gladness instead of suspicion. And once you see that self-concept can be rebuilt, an urgent question rises up immediately. If the old self-concept was built through repetition, then how exactly does it get dismantled? Does it get argued with? Does it get suppressed? Does it get shouted down with louder affirmations? And Florence Scovel Shinn's answer to that question is more tender than most people expect, and it is exactly where we turn next. I declare that beneath my words stands a self I am worthy of, and that self is rising now. The fifth key is this. The old self-concept must be gently let die, and I want to be very careful here with what that word means, because Florence Scovel Shinn was never speaking of any literal ending. She was speaking of an old false identity, quietly dissolving, so that your real self, the one already worthy of supply, is finally set free to live. This is not a violent death. It is not a battle. It is simply a releasing, the way autumn releases a leaf, without any struggle at all. Think of a coat you outgrew years ago, still hanging in the closet out of habit. You do not mourn a coat like that. You simply let it go, so you can move freely. This is exactly what happens to the anxious, scarcity-minded self you have been wearing. It is not punished. It is not fought. It is simply released. The way you release a coat that no longer fits the person you actually are. Consider a man who spent 15 years introducing himself, even silently in his own mind. As someone who barely gets by, he built an entire wardrobe of small habits around that coat. He checked prices twice before buying anything. He flinched whenever a friend suggested a nicer restaurant. He kept an old, worn coat literally in his closet because a part of him still believed that was who he was. One ordinary morning, he finally gave the coat away to a donation bin, not as a symbolic gesture, simply because it no longer fit. And driving home afterward, he noticed, almost by accident, that he felt lighter in his chest as well as his hands. Florence Scovel Shinn would say the outer letting go and the inner letting go were never really two different things at all. They were the same motion happening on two different levels at once. Notice also how tightly people cling to the old identity, even while complaining about it. A woman may say, "I hate always struggling," and yet repeat that very sentence so often, it becomes the one steady thread holding her whole self together. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that most people cling to limitation because it has become familiar. And familiar, even when it is painful, can feel safer than the unfamiliar space of genuine possibility. The coat is worn thin, it lets in the cold, and still it feels like home, simply because it is known. But she would gently remind you that you were never that coat. You were only ever the one wearing it, and the one wearing it is always free to set it down, quietly, without ceremony, without needing anyone's permission at all. Let this letting go happen in small, ordinary moments this week. The moment you almost say, "I can't afford that," and instead simply pause. The moment you almost apologize for asking a fair price, and instead simply state it plainly. Each small pause is the coat sliding another inch off your shoulders, until one day, without any dramatic scene marking the change, you notice it is simply no longer there. I declare that my old poverty self has quietly fallen away, and my true self stands free. The sixth key is this: gratitude is an active multiplying force, not a polite afterthought you offer once supply has already arrived. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that giving thanks before the visible evidence appears is one of the most powerful acts of faith available to a person, because gratitude spoken in advance says to your own consciousness, "I already believe this is mine," and consciousness, once convinced, goes to work quietly rearranging circumstances to agree with it. Most people have this backwards. They wait for the check to arrive before they allow themselves to feel thankful. And Florence Scovel Shinn would gently correct that order. Gratitude offered only after the fact is not faith at all. It is simply arithmetic. Anyone can be thankful for a thing already sitting in their hand. The power she pointed to lives in being thankful for the thing that has not yet appeared. Think of the difference between saying, "I will be grateful once the raise comes through," and saying, "Thank you that my work is already recognized and rewarded." The first postpones belief and waits for evidence. The second practices belief now, while the outcome is still invisible. And it is that willingness that Florence Scovel Shinn called active faith. A mirror can only show you what is already standing in front of it. But gratitude spoken ahead of the evidence is a magnet, reaching out and drawing something toward itself that was not there a moment before. One is passive observation, the other is active creation, and it is only the second kind she ever meant by thanksgiving as a spiritual practice. Consider the small business owner who once opened her ledger each month with a knot already forming in her stomach, coffee going cold beside her, shoulders curled forward in dread before she had even looked at a single number. Now picture her new morning instead. She sits with that same coffee, she says quietly, before opening anything at all. "Thank you that this business is already provided for," and only then opens the books. The numbers have not changed, simply because she spoke first. But she has changed, meeting whatever the page shows her from steadiness instead of dread. She began noticing referrals she might have missed while anxious, greeting hesitant customers with warmth instead of desperation. And desperation, as Florence Scovel Shinn often warned, repels the very thing it is chasing, while calm gratitude draws it closer. Gratitude also multiplies in a second and quieter way, because what you thank sincerely, you notice more of. It works the way a person who buys a certain make of car suddenly notices that same car everywhere on the road. The cars were always there, only the attention had never been trained to find them. Picture two neighbors receiving the very same small tax refund in the same week. One glances at it, mutters that it is barely anything, and forgets it by dinner. The other holds it a moment longer and says quietly, "Thank you. More is already on its way." The amount in both accounts is identical, but only one of them has just planted a seed, and only one of them will be watching closely enough next month to notice the small answered prayer when it arrives. Florence Scovel Shinn also taught that thanksgiving, spoken in the middle of a difficulty, is far more powerful than thanksgiving spoken only in comfortable seasons. Because anyone can be grateful when all is well, it takes a settled faith to say thank you while the bill is still unpaid, while the answer has not yet come. That is not pretending the difficulty away. It is refusing to let the difficulty be the final word. It is standing in the middle of the boulder and still speaking the word of the river. This is the gratitude offered on credit, so to speak, before the ledger confirms it. And it is precisely that willingness which convinces consciousness the debt is already settled. So gratitude is never a soft afterthought tacked onto the end of manifestation. It is one of the most active forces at work inside it, the coin already being multiplied before it has finished being counted. And once gratitude has been multiplying quietly in the background, a natural question arises. What happens when supply seems to stall anyway, despite the gratitude, despite the corrected word? And that question is exactly where we turn now. I declare that I give thanks now, and my thanks are already multiplying my supply. The seventh key is this, and it is the deepest one we will walk through together. So let us take it slowly, in pieces, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that supply arrives most easily through non-resistance, and almost no one hears that teaching correctly the first time. So we will unfold it piece by piece, turning it again and again in the light, until it is unmistakable. First, consider what resistance actually feels like in an ordinary body on an ordinary day. It is the tight jaw when a bill arrives, the clenched stomach when checking a balance, the tense breath before opening an email from a client, the shallow sleep the night before a payment is due. Resistance rarely announces itself with drama. It simply lives quietly in the shoulders, in the tightened hands, in the way a person grips the steering wheel a little harder on the drive to work, after a hard conversation about money. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this bracing is not a small, harmless habit. She taught it is a form of prayer said backward, because whatever you brace against with that much attention and that much fear, you are actually concentrating your creative power upon. The very word wand implies direction, and even a trembling hand still points the wand somewhere, so bracing against lack, however understandable, however human, still aims the wand directly at more lack. This is the part almost no one wants to hear, and yet it is also the most freeing part of the entire teaching, because it means the way out was never about trying harder to force money to appear through sheer effort and gritted teeth. It was always about releasing the grip that has been unconsciously pointing the wand at scarcity the whole time. Second, consider the image of the river and the boulder more closely, because Florence Scovel Shinn loved teachings that could be carried in a single picture. A river does not fight the boulder in its path. It does not clench. It does not slow down to argue with the stone. It simply bends, finds the lower ground, and continues onward, without losing a single drop of its own momentum. And here is the detail most people miss when they hear this image the first time. The river is not weaker for bending. The river is not defeated by the boulder. The river actually reaches the sea faster by refusing to waste its energy in a battle it was never designed to win. Through force. Florence Scovel Shinn would say, this is exactly how supply wants to move through your life. Not by demolishing every obstacle through sheer will, but by flowing intelligently around what cannot yet be moved, while never once stopping its forward motion toward you. When a bill arrives that momentarily startles you, the untrained response is to brace, to spiral, to rehearse worst-case scenarios late into the night. The trained response, the response Florence Scovel Shinn spent her whole life teaching, is to acknowledge the boulder calmly, name it honestly, and then keep speaking the word of supply anyway, without waiting for the boulder to move first, because supply was never obligated to wait for your fear to subside before it could begin flowing again. The river never waits for the boulder to apologize before it continues toward the sea. Third, consider what non-resistance is not, because this is exactly where people quietly misunderstand the whole teaching and then dismiss it as unrealistic. Non-resistance is not passivity. It is not lying down and doing nothing. It is not pretending the bill does not exist. It is not smiling emptily while ignoring an overdraft notice. Florence Scovel Shinn was a deeply practical teacher. She paid her bills on time. She balanced her own ledgers carefully. She took reasonable, sensible action in the visible world every single day of her life. Non-resistance simply means you take that same practical action from a place of calm expectation rather than clenched fear. You still write the check. You still make the phone call. You still send the email. But one way strengthens the very lack you are trying to escape by rehearsing it in your body for hours afterward. And the other way quietly starves that lack of the attention it needs to keep repeating itself. The action looks almost identical from the outside, and yet the two people performing it are living in entirely different worlds on the inside. It is not the action that resistance corrupts. It is the atmosphere the action is performed in. Fourth, let us look closer still at what the clenched fist actually costs, because most people assume resistance is at worst neutral, that bracing for the worst can only protect them and never actually harm them, and Florence Scovel Shinn would gently challenge that assumption. Picture a hand closed tightly around a coin, so tightly the knuckles whiten. That hand cannot receive a second coin, no matter how many are offered to it. It is not that the world stopped giving, it is that the hand forgot how to open. This is exactly what chronic financial dread does to a person. It closes the very hand supply was meant to fill, and then that same person wonders honestly why nothing new ever seems to reach them. The answer was never a shortage out in the world. The answer was a fist that had simply forgotten it was allowed to relax. And a fist cannot be argued open, it can only be gently released. Fifth, let us walk through an entire ordinary day using this key, slowly, hour by hour, so the mechanism becomes completely undeniable and not merely a nice idea. At 7 in the morning, an unexpected notification arrives about a late payment. The untrained response spends the next hour in low-grade dread while getting dressed, replays the notification during the entire commute instead of noticing the sunrise, mentions it irritably to a coworker by 9, still simmering quietly over it during lunch at noon, is short and impatient with a spouse about a completely unrelated expense by 6 in the evening, and lies awake rehearsing worst possible outcomes at 11 at night. That is 17 straight hours of resistance, 17 hours of pointing the wand at scarcity, over a single incident that objectively took less than 5 minutes to read on a screen. Now consider the trained response to that exact same notification. At 7 in the morning, a breath, a calm acknowledgement, I see this, and I am already provided for. A practical email sent at 8 to resolve it factually and completely. And then, remarkably, the rest of the day proceeds untouched by it. The co-worker conversation at 9 is warm instead of tense. Lunch at noon is actually tasted and enjoyed instead of rushed through anxiously. The evening at home is peaceful. Sleep at 11 comes easily and deeply. Same notification, same 5 minutes of actual information, and an entire day either lost to resistance or preserved through non-resistance. This is not a small difference multiplied over a lifetime. It becomes the entire difference between a life that feels like a struggle and a life that feels like it flows. And it is worth noticing that in both versions of that day, the bill still got paid. The only thing that changed was how much of the day was handed over to fear along the way. Sixth, consider also how resistance quietly spreads beyond the single incident that triggered it. This is something Florence Scovel Shinn was careful to point out. Resistance rarely stays contained to the exact thing you were worried about. The tension from the 7 o'clock notification bled into the 9 o'clock conversation, and then into the 6 o'clock evening, and then into sleep itself. Fear is not a tidy tenant. It does not stay in the one room you rented to it. It wanders through the whole house, touching relationships, touching sleep, touching the tone of voice used with people who had nothing to do with the original bill at all. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the real cost of resistance is almost never the thing being resisted. The real cost is everything else in the day that gets quietly poisoned by it. Picture two co-workers sitting side by side at the very same desk, both waiting on the very same delayed invoice. One spends the wait refreshing her inbox every 4 minutes, sighing loudly enough that the whole office absorbs her dread. The other simply says quietly to herself, "This is already on its way to me," and returns her attention fully to the work in front of her. The invoice arrives on the very same day for both of them, but only one of them actually lived that day while it was arriving. Seventh, and this is where the key finally turns all the way. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that non-resistance is really just faith, wearing a very calm face. It is the visible evidence of a person who has genuinely stopped believing lack has the final word over their life, because you cannot truly relax around something you still secretly believe controls your fate. Relaxation that is real, not performed, not forced, not gritted through with a fake smile, but real, is only possible once conviction has shifted underneath it first. This is why simply forcing yourself to appear calm while still gripped by dread rarely works for very long. The body always tells the truth eventually. The shoulders creep back up, the jaw tightens again by afternoon. What actually works is returning again and again to the word, to the self-concept, to the gratitude already at work, until calm becomes the honest and natural output of genuine belief, rather than a mask worn nervously over hidden fear. It is not that the calm produces the faith. It is that the faith, held long enough, finally produces the calm. And once that calm is genuine, the whole body begins to soften around money, the way a hand finally opens once it remembers it was never in danger of losing anything at all. And once resistance has genuinely fallen away, not suppressed, not hidden, but genuinely released, a final and tender question remains. If supply flows best through non-resistance, how do you actually know which way to flow, which door to walk through, which opportunity is the true one, and which is only a distraction dressed up convincingly? And Florence Scovel Shinn's answer to that question is quieter than almost anything else she ever taught. I declare that I release my grip, and supply now flows to me without struggle. The eighth key is this: guidance moves through you as a still small voice. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this quiet inner prompting is one of the most reliable instruments of supply a person owns, though it is almost always the most ignored, because it rarely shouts, it rarely insists. It simply nudges gently toward the next right step, and it never floodlights the entire staircase at once. It illuminates only the single step directly in front of you. Faith does not require the whole staircase to be visible. Faith only requires enough light for the next footstep, and this is why so many sincere people stall out, not because guidance was withheld, but because they refuse to move until shown the 10th step, while still standing on the first. First, consider how this voice actually feels, because most people listen for the wrong sensation. They expect a booming certainty, a lightning bolt of clarity, and so they miss the small, quiet tug Florence Scovel Shinn described as the true guidance. It feels more like a gentle leaning than a shout, more like a compass needle settling than an alarm bell ringing. And because it is so quiet, it is easily mistaken for nothing at all. Urgency and panic are almost always the counterfeit. The true voice is closer to a friend, leaning toward your ear in a quiet room. It never needs to raise itself, because it was never competing with anything. It was simply waiting for you to stop competing with it. Second, consider an ordinary Thursday. A woman wakes with a faint, almost silly impulse to call her sister. No real reason, nothing urgent, and her rational mind offers a dozen better uses of the next 10 minutes. She nearly lets the impulse pass, but she pauses long enough to notice it and makes the call. Her sister answers in tears, having just lost a freelance client that morning, and mentions, almost offhand, a small local business nearby has been quietly looking for exactly her skill set. By Friday afternoon, there is an interview scheduled. None of it arrived with trumpets. It arrived disguised as a faint urge to make one phone call, and had she waited for a louder sign, the whole quiet chain would have simply dissolved unnoticed, the way most guidance does, in the space between the impulse and the excuse. Third, a mind constantly reacting to notifications, constantly rehearsing worry, has no room left to notice a voice that only whispers, Guidance never plays favorites. It speaks to every consciousness equally. But it can only be heard by a mind quiet enough to catch it. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn placed such emphasis on stillness, not as a luxury reserved for the spiritually advanced, but as basic daily maintenance for anyone serious about their own supply. A radio playing in a noisy room still broadcasts the very same signal it would in a silent one. The signal never weakens. Only the ability to receive it does. Fourth, guidance often arrives wearing the clothing of ordinary preference rather than obvious mysticism. A sudden mild desire to take a different route home. A passing thought to reach out to someone you have not spoken with in months. A quiet reluctance to sign a contract that looks perfectly reasonable on paper. None of these announce themselves, and this is exactly why so many people walk straight past their own guidance, mistaking it for a random whim, when it may be the very door supply intended to walk through. Fifth, consider setting aside even 5 quiet minutes before the noise of the day begins, not to demand an answer, but simply to listen, without an agenda. Some days nothing seems to come, and that is fine. The listening itself is the practice. The same way a muscle grows even on the days it does not feel especially strong. And over weeks of this small, unremarkable habit, the whisper does not grow louder so much as your own ear grows sharper, which amounts, in practice, to the very same thing. Sixth, when guidance is genuinely followed, it never contradicts itself. It leads consistently toward greater peace, greater clarity, and greater supply, though rarely by the route the anxious mind would have forced on its own. And this still small voice is what protects every other key we have walked through from becoming mechanical, because affirmations spoken without listening can quietly become just another form of noise, while affirmations spoken and then followed by quiet, attentive listening become a genuine two-way conversation with the very source of your own supply. And once you have learned to listen this closely, a final question remains, gentle but important. What happens when the old broke years finally need to be closed for good? Not merely improved, but actually closed. And that is exactly where we arrive now, together, at the final key. I declare that I listen for the still small voice, and I follow where it leads me. The 9th key is this. Let the broke years actually close, not linger on as a story you keep retelling at dinner tables and in quiet moments of doubt. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that many people who genuinely improve their circumstances still keep the old ledger open in their minds, still call themselves someone who struggled with money long after the struggling has stopped, and that lingering story quietly keeps the old coin in circulation even while new coins are trying to be minted. Think of a decade you once lived through where money felt like a constant battle, and notice honestly whether you still speak of it as who you are, rather than as a chapter already finished. First, consider how easily an old ledger disguises itself as harmless honesty. A man doing perfectly well today still says at every gathering, "Oh, we never had 2 coins to rub together growing up," and says it fondly, never noticing that each repetition dips the pen back into yesterday's ink and writes one more entry into a book that should have closed years ago. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the past only keeps power over you for as long as your own tongue keeps signing its name to it. The facts cannot be undone, but the story told about them can be laid down, and laying it down is simply refusing to keep paying a debt already settled. Second, consider the woman who cleared every old bill from her hardest year, and yet a year later still introduces herself by saying, "I am the one who almost lost everything." The numbers healed months before her language did, and Florence Scovel Shinn would say this is exactly backwards. The outer ledger closed, but the inner ledger, written in her own repeated words, stayed wide open, still insisting to her consciousness that lack was her permanent address rather than a season already left behind. Third, consider what closing the ledger actually requires. Not forgetting, here is the whole picture. Money was never the thing you were lacking. It is not the wallet. It is the mint of your own consciousness. Your consciousness is not passive. It is not a container. It is the mint that strikes every coin before it appears. Your tongue is not a passive reporter of your life. It is the wand that either mints increase or decrease. Beneath every word sits a self-concept, and it is not fixed. It only feels permanent because it is old. The old self-concept is not defeated by force. It is gently released, the way a coat you outgrew is set down. Gratitude is not a polite afterthought. It is an active force multiplying supply before the proof arrives. Supply does not flow through force. It flows through non-resistance, like a river bending gently around a boulder rather than fighting it. Guidance is not loud. It is a still small voice, illuminating only the next step, and the broke years are not who you are. They are simply a chapter that is finally allowed to close. Every one of these was never 9 separate keys at all. They were 9 turns of the very same key. The recognition that your own word, spoken from a renewed self-concept, held without resistance, and followed by quiet listening, has been shaping your supply the entire time. And if you want a daily companion to help you keep turning this key long after today, the Overflow Covenant was built exactly for that. It is a simple daily practice rooted entirely in Florence Scovel Shinn's own teaching, gentle affirmations, guided listening, and daily reminders to keep your word working as your wand instead of working against you. It is available now for a small monthly investment, fully backed by a 30-day refund if it does not bless you. You will find the link in the description below, and I would be honored to walk this path together with you there. So let us close the way we began. Say it once more with me in your heart. My tongue is now minting my fortune. My consciousness is the vault of divine supply. My word is my wand. And as you go about this ordinary day, remember gently that the most powerful book ever written about money and the spoken word was never really about money at all. It was about the word, spoken quietly, believed completely, and finally, set free to become your wand.